Yeah, this is our official Senate background. It's
Oh,
required
wow.
voting
It's
remotely in
beautiful.
committee.
Yeah.
I'm from Ohio, and none of our lawmakers have beautiful backgrounds like that. Gotta be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Arizona House has this beautiful backdrop created by a Native American artist, and it's the Grand Canyon. And it's how many panels, JD? Do you remember?
I think it was 13 on each side, I want to say, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, representing each tribe
Mhm.
in our state, and it's gorgeous. It's beautiful.
Yeah, no, when Rusty did that, I was admittedly a little envious. I didn't think of it on my watch.
You're no artist, JD.
It's true. It's true. I mean, he is the artist in every sense of the word. So.
Yeah, our speaker here is a sculptor and a painter, and he's pretty good at what he's a real artist.
Very good. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. If you're just joining us, thank you again for joining us. We're going to wait maybe just one more minute or maybe 2 more minutes so others can join us as well, and then we're going to start this morning's discussion. Again, if you're just joining us, thank you for joining us. We'll wait maybe just a minute or so, and then we'll start. All right, I think we are going to start. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. The Arizona Capital Times covers state politics, and we've been around since before statehood. If you don't have a subscription, please let me know. I'll get you squared away. As you know, Arizona is among the 3 states that require nonviolent offenders to serve at least 85% of their sentences before they become eligible for release to supervision, with the exception of drug possession offenders. And in the last several years, advocates for prison reform have sought to change that. And this year, they've gotten closer than ever to achieving that goal. We will talk about the latest version of the earned release credit legislation in Arizona. We will try and contextualize that against the nationwide landscape for earned release credit programs, the confluence of interests by progressives and conservatives, which is quite notable, to reduce America's prison population, push for other reforms. Which means we have a lot to talk about this morning. But before that, I want to thank our sponsor for engaging with us this way and helping to ensure that we can have a platform such as this one to talk about important policy issues in Arizona. The Justice Action Network is the largest bipartisan organization in the country advocating for criminal justice reform at the state and federal level. From state houses to the White House, Justice Action Network and its partners from the right to the left have paved the way for life-changing criminal justice reforms that safely reduce incarceration, provide second chance opportunities, save taxpayer dollars, and make our community safer. And here to welcome us this morning is Lauren Krisai, who is the Senior Policy Analyst at the Justice Action Network. Lauren?
Thank you, Luigi, and the Arizona Capital Times for hosting this conversation. And thank you to our incredible panelists for agreeing to share their perspectives on this important issue. As Luigi said, my name is Lauren Krisai. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst at the Justice Action Network. It's a national bipartisan organization that seeks to bring evidence-based criminal justice reforms at the state and federal levels. And we're so happy to sponsor this event today. I've also been working on various criminal justice issues in Arizona for 4 years now as a part of that work with Jan. So to kick off this conversation, I know Luigi already mentioned the statistic, but I think it's important to mention it again, that Arizona is only one of 3 states that requires all individuals behind bars to serve 85% of their sentences before becoming eligible for release, including those convicted of nonviolent offenses. Every other state, just to emphasize, 47 to be exact, allow those convicted of nonviolent offenses to be released early if they meet certain qualifications. Arizona initially changed this rule with a bill sponsored by former Senator Eddie Farnsworth, opening up early release opportunities for those convicted of drug possession offenses and who completed certain programming. And this year, there's an opportunity for the legislature to pass reforms that will expand earned release opportunities for those convicted of other nonviolent offenses, which would bring Arizona more in line with the overwhelming majority of states across the country. The bill, Senate Bill 1064, is sponsored by Senator Mesnard, with the support of Representative Blackman, represents 3 years of stakeholder meetings and hearings. I look forward to hearing from all the panelists as to why it's time for Arizona to pass this important bill and just how we've gotten to this point. And thank you again for what is sure to be a great discussion. Thanks, Luigi.
Thank you, Lauren. We have a great panel this morning, as Lauren mentioned. Joining us is Grover Norquist, who is the president of Americans for Tax Reform, a taxpayer advocacy group that he founded in 1985 at President Ronald Reagan's request. ATR works to limit the size and cost of government and opposes higher taxes at the federal, state, and local levels. Mr. Norquist and ATR are behind a taxpayer protection pledge, which asks all candidates for federal and state office to commit themselves in writing to oppose all net tax increases. He chairs the DC-based Wednesday meeting, which is a weekly gathering of more than 150 elected officials, political activists, and movement leaders. Among other places, he serves on the board of the Parental Rights Organization and Center for the National Interest, formerly the Nixon Center. He also serves as president of the American Society of Competitiveness. He is an author, speaker, and the most well-known anti-high tax activist in the country. Mr. Norquist, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Also joining us this morning is Senator J.D. Mesnard, who represents Legislative District 17, which includes Chandler, Gilbert, and Sun Lakes. He serves as chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. He was elected to the Senate in November of 2018 after serving 8 years in the Arizona House of Representatives, including as Speaker of the House during his final term. Prior to running for office, he spent 8 years working at the Arizona State Senate, where he served as a policy advisor on issues ranging from education, transportation, and retirement, family services, and government administration. He's a small business owner, investor, and consultant. He also works as an adjunct faculty where he has taught courses in political science for over a decade. And he holds a bachelor's degree in music composition, as well as a master's degrees in business and in public administration. And if you ever need somebody to play for you during your wedding, Senator Mesnard is your guy. JD, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Also joining us this morning is Pat Nolan, who is the director of the American Conservative Union Foundation's Center for Criminal Justice Reform. Launched in 2014, the center informs and mobilizes public support for criminal justice reforms based on conservative principles and works with government officials to effectively implement those reforms. He is also a leader of the Right and Crime Project and national movement of conservative leaders supporting reforms to America's criminal justice system aimed at containing prison costs while keeping the public safe. Previously, he served for 15 years in the California State Assembly, 4 of those as the Assembly Republican leader. He's an expert witness at congressional hearings and is the author of When Prisoners Return, a book that describes the important role of the church in helping prisoners get back on their feet after they are released. Pat, thank you for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
And also finally joining us is Kurt Altman, who is a lawyer specializing in criminal defense and public policy. He is also the owner and principal of Kurt M. Altman PLC. He serves as the state director for Right and Crime. Mr. Altman has 27 years of practice focusing on criminal law, constitutional litigation, and policy development. And in 2012, he joined the Goldwater Institute, becoming its director of national affairs and general counsel, which started him on the path of lobbying for clients in the halls of state capitals throughout the country. And in 2016, he became a signatory for Right on Crime. The year after, he joined the Texas Public Policy Foundation's criminal justice reform movement as Right on Crime State Policy Director for Arizona and New Mexico. He also serves as an adjunct law professor at Arizona State University, where he taught courses in white-collar crime and criminal evidence. When he is not working, you'll find him at a soccer field in Arizona, which I'm really happy about that. I also play soccer, and I haven't played for more than a year now. Are you playing soccer, Mr. Altman? Are you able to do it?
I used to, but I watch my kids play now, Luigi. So
perfect. As I mentioned, we have a very big subject talked about this morning. But before that, I want to check in with Senator Messner. Senator Messner, where are we in the budget process at this point? And what is your sine die prediction?
Oh man, this is not what I signed up for, Luigi. But I really don't know. Not as in the loop as I used to be on the budget. There's a bare minimum majority in the two chambers, so that can empower people to hold out for whatever it is they want. I want a big tax cut, for instance. I'm pretty sure we're not going to be done in April. Whether we're done in May, I could see that happening in one scenario, but also see it dragging on. So my sine die prediction is we'll be done sometime this year.
Well, that's not very comforting. So if you're planning on any, don't plan on any vacation. Don't have any vacation plans before July, I guess is a good advice to anybody. Grover, I want to ask you, because you're as I mentioned earlier, your organization principally opposes higher taxes. And I wonder what got you interested in prison reform? What is the reason why you are in this arena?
It's a good question. I mean, one of the things that if you want low taxes, you also want to reform government so it costs less and it can do more things competently with fewer resources. So you really have to look at what government does. I mean, some of the decisions are no government should do X. Who's going to censor the books? No one. How about no one? Okay. But there's some things you do want the government to do, and punishing criminals is one of them. Working to stop crime is one of them. And the question is, how well do we do it? And I think I noticed that conservatives were absent from the discussion of criminal justice reform. It was the only people talking about it were the people who didn't want anybody to go to prison and didn't want to punish criminals. And nobody listened to them and so things moved in the exact opposite direction from where the left was pushing, because they were unserious about keeping the crime rate down and unserious about keeping murderers in prison. And so they kind of lost all ability to function. If no one was watching, then the bureaucracy just serves itself. And so I started working with a number of conservatives, many of whom had been in prison or had relatives in prison and had firsthand knowledge. The Christian community that focused on working in prisons and with prisoners about what's going on, what makes sense. And as a conservative Republican, this is largely a state and local issue. And that's so helpful because there are 50 states. And we can look at what's working and what's not working in all 50 states and move towards what's working with a fair amount of confidence. At the federal level, if you're going to do one thing for the whole country, who knows if it's stupid or not, because the whole country gets hit with the same thing at the same time. It could be the weather that made things better or worse. But in the states, you have the really laboratories of democracy. And that's why I think we've made as rapid progress in many areas of criminal justice reform as we have, because you can step forward comfortably if you saw 4 other states do something and nobody died and nobody lost an election and the world didn't end.
Thank you for that. And Pat, I want to go to you. Can you give us a sort of a brief background of where we're at nationally? Where is Arizona nationally in terms of prison reform, in terms of reducing our prison population? If you can situate this, where are we at?
Well, Arizona's way behind. As an Arizona resident, I've been really frustrated because conservative states across the country have seen that by intelligently using prison space for violent criminals, we can free up the folks for nonviolent crimes, supervise them in the community, keep the public safe, but also save money. And so, beginning with Texas, which was in the forefront of this, Tough on Crime Texas decided to reform their system, and as a result, they've been able to close 8 prisons. They've saved billions of dollars, and the crime rate's the lowest it's been since 1967. So, it's a trifecta: safer public, less tax dollars, and prisoners the nonviolent prisoners able to serve their terms with their families, supporting their families, holding jobs, paying taxes. So it's a winner. I've been puzzled why Arizona hasn't come along. Utah has made these reforms. Georgia has made these reforms. Mississippi is on the verge of doing it. Louisiana has. These are not liberal, touchy-feely states. These are conservatives who looked at it and said, we're not getting the public safety for the money we're paying. We're not getting the bang for the buck. Arizona spends over $1 billion. It's astounding to me that the legislature hasn't said, gee, by more intelligently using the prison space, we can save money, put some of it in programs and help, pay for the rest of the government with those savings. The last thing I'd say is a wonderful warden, taught me this phrase, and I think it really sums up where conservatives are. Prisons are for people we're afraid of, but we're filling them with folks we're just mad at.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Kurt, I want to ask you about what you're a criminal defense lawyer. What are you seeing on the ground, and what do you think is the biggest problem that funnels more people than perhaps we would like in our prison system? And if there's one thing we can do to help reduce that prison population with all the benefits that accrue as a result, what would that be?
Well, I don't know if we have enough time to answer all those questions, Luigi, but I appreciate it. And there's a lot of things we can do. I think I come at it from a unique perspective because for 14 or 15 years of my career, I was a prosecutor, both federal and state. Probably thousands of those people in prison today, maybe, I had something to do with. And then for the last 14 or 15 years, I've been a criminal defense attorney. So I've seen them both. And one of the things that strikes me is all these mandatory laws, all these mandatory time, they're going to send 85% on every crime, whether it's marijuana or, car theft in Arizona. It's keeping people locked away from their families. It's keeping people out of the community, some people that need to be, but it's also taking people away and depriving them of that opportunity to get back into the community and reintegrate. Everybody in the system that does something should be held accountable, but so should the state. As Pat said and Grover said, I would echo, the taxpayers pay $1.1 billion, $1.2 billion every year. And what's our return on the investment? I'm not going to sit here and be one of the people that say that the entire system is broken. It's not. But the system can be a lot better, and it can continuously get better. Any other company, I know the state and the BOP or the DOC is not a company, but any other company is going to invest routinely the money they have into product development to make it better, to make it cheaper, to make it more effective. Why don't we do that with our $1.1 billion? We have people going to prison, getting no treatments, getting no attention, coming out with nothing to do, and then going back. And we've seen that since Truth in Sentencing in 1994 or so. Why can't we take a look at it and make it better? And I think that's the biggest thing. There are things on the front end, in the courtroom, where prosecutors can reform, where courts can reform, where judges can have more discretion. And there are things on the back end. And what we're talking about with this bill is once these people are in prison, how long should they stay there? And what should we do with them? We should give them some opportunity to make themselves better. And I think that's what this is about. And I think that's a huge issue that we can address with this bill and others.
Let's talk about this bill. Senator Messner, walk us through the major provisions of this bill. How is it different or the same than a version that already already was passed out of the House and had a pretty strong support, pretty robust support? That proposal, of course, is stuck in the Senate at this point. So tell us about the striker to SB 1064.
So it's a pretty simple concept, and the concept is the same in both bills with some exceptions, and that is how do we incentivize people who are in the system to go through programs that make them better people, whether it's getting treatment they need for a drug addiction, whether it's acquiring a skill or a trade that they can use when they get out of the system, so they're not just floundering out there and end up back in because they had nowhere to land. And by the way, I will say that I think one of the holdups on the criminal justice reform conversation is the feeling among many, and I would say conservative folks in particular, that letting people out sooner equated to dangerous people on the streets, a reduction in public safety. But my interest in this issue is the opposite. And that is, how do we make our streets safer by reducing recidivism, reducing the increase or the sort of nature of folks who they serve their time, they get out, and then they do it again. That isn't safe for anybody. So what this bill does, and this is not unlike the other version, which I'm less familiar with because I wasn't involved in that, but it would say with drug offenders, we're going to allow you to go through meaningful programs. Probably a lot of it's going to be focused on treatment. And then instead of it being, I think 70% is where it's at now, or 85% in some cases, we'll actually allow for up to, for you to only have to serve in the system 50% of your time, and the rest would be supervision. And that's another, by the way, misunderstanding, is the feeling like we're just releasing these folks and they're just out in society, no supervision at all. They serve their sentence. It's just in a different location. And to the point that was made earlier, allows them to sort of reintegrate into society and support their families, et cetera. For those that are not drug offenders, but not violent offenders, it's the same principle, but it would be reducing to, I believe, 67% that they would have to serve. And so it's not quite as much. One of the biggest differences, frankly, between the two bills is that there's a lot of discussion about, are we going to apply these laws to those in the system, or is it just going to be prospective? In other words, retroactive or prospective. And this has been one of the central debates in the issue. It may end up becoming the main issue, aside from also who this applies to. And the bill, as it stands now, 1064, makes the drug offense retroactive. So it would apply to those in the system as it stands now. Whereas the others, the non-drug but non-violent side, it would only be prospective. And I can get into sort of why it's gone that direction. I know there have been some questions posed about it, but that's one of the major differences of the bill. And there will be amendments coming as I try to find that sweet spot between, prosecutors and sheriffs, law enforcement on one side, and victims advocates, and then obviously those pushing for criminal justice reform on the other.
So I want to make this one clear. So right now there's a bifurcation, right? So for drug offenders, it's retroactive. For non-violent, non-drug offenders, it's prospective. So it only affects them once this bill, or after this bill, is enacted into law, assuming it is enacted into law. What you're saying is that negotiations are underway. It's plausible that those terms could change. It could be, they're applied to everybody, retroactively, or it could be applied to everybody prospectively, correct?
I don't think it will apply to everybody retroactively. I know that was one of the questions there. We amended the bill actually to make that non-violent, non-drug offender portion prospective. That was a concession to get some support from critical folks. It was also, by the way, an acknowledgement of the argument. And this, just so you know, the argument is that when a prosecutor operates under a set of rules, victims essentially are promised that this is going to be the punishment, and now we're proposing changing those rules. And so there was some resistance there that we're changing the rules on what victims expected or were promised. On the drug side, you don't have quite the same victim situation. But there are issues there as well. So yes, it could change. I don't think it'll be changing in the direction of making everything retroactive. I think that would be a difficult sell.
Thank you for the explanation. I want to go to Grover. One of the things you mentioned, sir, is the fact that prisons cost a lot of money, and in fact, in Arizona, whether we have a recession, whether our revenues dip or not, the cost of the prisons have remained relatively the same. Throughout the last in the last recession, for example. Every other agency or program in the state has been cut, but prisons really have not been. Can you tell us what kinds of cost savings we would be looking at if we actually did these reforms, and tie it to the fact that if you had those kinds of savings, where do you want the money invested?
Well, several good points there. One, a lot of the cost is prison guards. Labor costs, pension costs, unfunded pensions. You can save a fair amount of money if you reduce the prison population so you can close entire prisons or avoid building new prisons. One of the things that Texas pointed to in their early successes was they're able to avoid building 2 prisons, which were going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars by being more careful about who they had in prison and who they had on supervision, parole, or probation outside of prison. And there are ways to dramatically reduce the cost of probation and parole, and technology allows you to do that in ways where you can call somebody on a cell phone and with voice recognition know 100%, and with GPS, you know where they are. They're with the phone and they're at work or they're at home, and you can see that, and you can make, call 6 calls a day. That you don't have a probation officer walking into a restaurant and letting everybody know that the busboy, is a criminal. But you just call and get the voice, and they're at work, or at home. And if they're not, then you go talk to them. But this amount of knowledge of what you can have in terms of making sure the person is not causing problems or getting in trouble is much less expensive and much more certain today than before. They used to have little old ladies in Georgia call people on the phone. I don't know how many voices you're supposed to be able to recognize, but I can't imagine that there weren't lots of problems in terms of being able, is that really John or is that somebody else? But with voice recognition, you can. So look, you want to reform government to do it better. You don't just shut a prison down. You want to reform the decision-making about who goes to prison and why. And the distinction between victimless crimes and crimes with victims is the biggest distinction of all. I mean, somebody who's hurting himself, you want to work with. Somebody who stole somebody else's car, there's a victim, and they should have some sort of say in how this thing goes forward. But again, we've watched states like Texas. I was just looking at some of the numbers. South Carolina dropped their imprisonment rate by 16% down, and crime is down 16%. Texas imprisonment rate went down 16%, and crime was down 30%. And this is not just a question of a secular trend down. It's taking place fastest and mostest in states that have begun to focus on who should be in prison, for what crimes, and for how long. So there's a lot we can look at and feel very comfortable that Arizona is not being asked to jump into traffic or jump into some unknown. Many states, most states, more than 40 of the states, have made exactly this decision over the last couple of decades. And so there's a lot of information to make Arizona legislators and citizen and crime victims feel comfortable.
But what you're saying is that we're not going into this as an experiment. It's already been done elsewhere. We're not experimenting with these ideas, with these programs.
There's a downside to being last, but there's also an upside to being last. You watched everybody else do things that worked or didn't work, and you can learn from that.
Yeah, it makes me think about our state Medicaid program, because we're among the last states to actually do that. And right now, our Medicaid program, at least by some people's standards, is the best in the country. Kurt, I wanna ask you one thing, which is, Grover had mentioned the fact that you've seen these reforms in other states, and then you've seen the prison population reduced, but also there's a reduction in crime. I want to, as a criminal defense lawyer, I guess it's an impossible question, but to what extent can you guarantee that if we did these reforms, we will in fact see that, a reduction in crime, our our streets will be safer, our communities will be safer.
Well, if I say that I'll guarantee it right now, does that mean it'll pass?
It's up to, I guess that's up to JD.
I'd love to guarantee it, but there are no guarantees, just like there's no guarantees that when you hire somebody to be a busboy, as Grover said, that doesn't have a felony or some sort of criminal history, that they'll do a good job. I think the folks that are in the system are really no different than the folks out of the system, except they made some sort of error in judgment, mistake, committed a crime, and are now paying for it. So I think the guarantee comes in a couple things. You give these people some hope and some incentive to do something. And the biggest impediments to preventing recidivism are housing and jobs. And if we just lock these people up for 85% of the time, don't give them any opportunity to better themselves, and then open those gates at the 85% mark and give them the thumbs up and say, good luck, they're not equipped really to deal with that. If we try and we do small things that government can do, we make sure they get driver's license, we give them some training, we teach them how to hammer a nail into a board, and give them that opportunity to go to work, support themselves, live with their families when they get out of the community, back out in the community, they're going to be a lot more successful. Am I saying everybody's going to be successful? No, that would be naive. But a lot more are going to be successful. And when they're successful, what does that mean? That means they're not going back into prison. They're not draining the taxpayer money by being in prison. They're actually probably contributing to the tax base and being better citizens. You know, there's a misconception about this bill. Let's say the drug offenders that are going to cut their time maybe in 50%. One, those folks, while they're inside, have to earn it. They just don't get 50% time. They have to take certain programs that are going to be developed. They have to learn, they have to pass those programs and earn it. So that's one misconception. They're just not being given this time off. And the other one is that at 50%, they're just going to be released without any supervision. They're still on community supervision when they come out. They still have to report to, you know, I'll call the person a parole officer. We don't use parole anymore. But to an officer, and that person is going to be able to help them, guide them to the right programs, maybe assist them in their reintegration into society. So we're just not opening the doors at 50% and saying, hey, thanks, we cut your time. These people have earned it and they're getting better opportunities. Can I guarantee that everybody's going to be successful? No, but I bet you a lot more would be. I would bet a lot of money on that.
So, you know, Senator Messner, where are you in the negotiation phase for this bill? And I guess really the question is that, a big question is, what are the chances of actually this proposal getting to the floor?
So I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get there. I think, so this is my bill in the House. The House had already passed an even broader version. So I'm not as concerned about the House. The Senate is a different story. Right now, we're continuing discussions with, you know, various folks that have an interest in this, but I am trying to figure out how I balance out, you know, the victims, advocates, and rights groups, and prosecutors and sheriffs, as I mentioned before. So, you know, I think we can get there, but here's my biggest concern. And this is a concern for everyone that's involved with all the various sides of this issue, is that folks get frustrated and let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There's no way we are going to come up with the perfect plan that makes everybody happy. Even some of the questions in the chat here talk about retroactivity and these different things. And I can already tell you that, you know, some folks will be unhappy that it doesn't go as far as they wish, or in some cases think it goes too far. That's the product of negotiation. But what I can tell you is that we've been trying to do this for years. And if we continue to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, then, you know, we will have another lost year. I'm doing everything I can to try to avoid that reality. I'm cautiously optimistic we'll be able to get there. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that, you know, folks may not love where we land, and that's just the nature of the legislative process.
And Pat, I want to go to you real quick, but Senator Messner, just a quick follow-up. really what you're describing is you potentially run into two scenarios, right? Under the first scenario, you actually craft a compromise that people can pass. Right? It gets enough support in your chamber. It goes to the House, where presumably there's not a whole lot of resistance there, or not as much in the Senate. It gets to the governor's desk and the governor signs it. That's one scenario. The other scenario is that you craft a compromise and it just repels everybody. It's not good enough for some. It offers too much for others, and the bill's dead.
I'm sorry, who was that question for, Luigi?
No, I'm just saying, is that a fair assumption to you?
Yes, that's a fair assumption. And there can be other motivations, out there. Some folks may feel like they'd rather have the nothing occur because they want to continue to leverage interest in the issue to, accomplish it in some other way. I typically get frustrated by those approaches. So I'm just going to stay focused on, frankly, I'm going to focus on what makes sense to me. I'm the bill sponsor, but obviously taking input from everybody. I have a lot of respect for those on all the different sides. They all bring a unique and interesting and meaningful perspective, whether it's the person in the system or their advocates or their family, or a person who is the victim of a crime, or folks in law enforcement trying to make sure our streets are safe. All bring a valid perspective to this, and that's why I'm including them all.
Pat, sorry, go ahead, sir. I know you wanted to say something earlier. You wanted to jump on earlier.
Yeah, well, first of all, we're really fortunate to have somebody as experienced as Senator Mesnard guiding this bill. The legislative process is arcane. It's made up of individual peoples. I used to explain, it's like as a kid, my bike had a combination lock, and you had to find the right combination to get them all lined up to pull out. And legislation's that way. It's literally individual votes it gets down to, and what you need to do to get them aboard. Now, you're never going to please everybody. The idea of, we can get 100% buy-in, that's just not going to happen. But reasonable things that people are concerned about are worth bringing up. I think it's important in this bill, for instance, that the victims are informed of the potential for release. I received the Victims Advocate Award from the Parents of Murdered Children for my work on behalf of victims, and they need to be part of this. However, they shouldn't be the sole explanation of it. And unfortunately, my experience is victims themselves are a lot more open to things that help improve the people that harm them, but their advocates, frankly, live off the pain that victims experience. So they're always out there fighting things like this, whereas the average victim I know would say, that makes sense. Let me know if there's a possibility, and I can do what I want. I also think, I was incarcerated for 29 months in the federal system. And I know that while a lot is said about helping improve prisoners while they're inside, virtually nothing is done. And I think one of the important things of this bill is it says some of the savings are going to programs that help these people change. Right now, they're released after the 85%, and frankly, nothing's been done to change them. Our communities will be safer if they have programs that teach them how to be a good parent, how to be a good employee, skills that are useful in the real world, not just cleaning hallways in the prison. These are individuals, and I'm also a very strong Catholic, and I believe we have a responsibility to also help them amend their ways, offer them ways to focus not on themselves, but on the higher power. When you accept that there is a God or a higher power, you automatically accept that the world doesn't revolve around you. Unfortunately, too many prisoners think the world revolves around them, And the siren song of the culture is do your own thing, make your own rules. Well, frankly, there are rules and there are consequences. So I think we need to work. The object should be that they leave prison better neighbors. And that's not necessarily the magic number of 85%. It can be lower if they've been given these programs that help them prepare to be good parents, good employees, good citizens.
Of course, the idea of redemption is a core Christian tenet. Thank you for pointing that out, Pat. Grover, I want to ask you something that may be a bit out of your comfort zone, but some of the criticisms against this, this earned release credits programs in general, generally speaking, is that for some it effectively alters the sentencing laws, or at least they view it that way. Some would argue that it violates the contract between prisoner and state. I think we've mentioned that. Others might think, it's soft on crime and the repercussions would be terrible for society, something like that. But I want to ask you about one other argument, which is that folks who have made grave errors should pay for their mistakes. And this is the way they pay for their mistakes. And letting them out sooner, the parameters of this proposal or any other earned release credit program, what it does is, for some, the argument is doesn't really allow them to be responsible and accountable for their mistakes, if you will. I want to get your thoughts, sir.
Well, when you say they need to make amends, they need to pay for what they did, that doesn't need to necessarily mean time inside a cell. That's a cost to them, but they're not paying anybody. They're not benefiting anybody by being inside a cell, unless you want to argue that they're violent and the benefit is that the whole benefit is that they're in the cell. There are lots of ways for people to try and make amends for things they did. For starters, people can pay money to the victims. They can be fined and stuff can go to the victim. They can make some sort of reparations. But also, if you want to punish people to convince other people not to commit crimes, you want to have some combination of punishment and rewards to make them choose a different path, a different set of decisions that they make. This is one where, all government is one size fits all, and that's why it generally doesn't do very well, because not everybody's the same. And this acknowledges somewhat that not all people who commit crimes are the same. You have to make an effort here to earn these time off credits. Somebody who sits in the cell and sulks and said, I didn't do anything wrong, doesn't get those credits, okay? Somebody who doesn't take seriously the efforts at reform that have to be part of getting those credits. So I think it's fair to treat different people differently when they're being different in how they're responding to the criminal justice reform. And I don't, one size fits all, it generally doesn't work very well. It's sort of not right for anybody. This is an effort to say the guy who's really trying to turn his life around needs to find some, not only he should get the right, you don't want him in prison if he's turned his life around and got stuff. You want him out taking care of his family and contributing to society and earning a living. Not people in prison are on welfare. They're getting lots of government money. It may not be a lot of fun, but it's welfare. They're not paying for it. We are. So you want to get people out of prison if prison is no longer servicing the function that you planned it to, which is to, yes, punish, but to get somebody so that when they come out, they are less likely to be criminals.
Sorry, I was muted. I want to ask Kurt the same question to you, sir.
I think I'd start by saying that the people we're talking about in this bill, I guess it depends on your definition, but are not the people that have made grave errors. There's a significant amount of offenses that are excluded in this bill, and a significant amount of crimes. Nobody that committed murder, nobody that hurt a child are going to be eligible for these credits. So we have people that have made errors, maybe significant errors, but I don't know if I'd go to grave. And the people that have made errors that have the ability with a little help to go back and support their family, like Grover just said, that is where we want them. We don't want them sitting behind bars with nothing to do and no incentive and no hope. And we also want to make room for those folks who did commit the grave errors. Because, I don't know if anybody else on this panel will say it, but I'll say it. Some people, not a lot, thank goodness, but some people belong where they end up for whatever reason. But most of that population can be treated, can be punished, can be held accountable in other ways. And that's what this is doing. So to answer that argument, we're not talking about the people that are making grave errors. Those people are not going to be affected about this bill. This bill focuses on the people that we can provide this earned release credit to while maintaining the safety of the community, while trying to keep families together, because if somebody's in prison and can go back to their family, again, much more likely to succeed on the outside than if they can't. And at the same time, we're going to save taxpayer money and be able to reinvest that into making the system better. So I think that's my answer.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the presumption here is that most of the folks that we're talking about are going to be back in society at one point. They will rejoin society at one point. So this proposal gives them a path, a potential path for success. They can take this path. This legislation requires, of course, programming. They're not just going to get released, right? They're going to have to earn this. And the idea is that if the state finds a way to help them, you reduce the prison population, but also you help them ensure that they're not going to go back to prisons very soon after they're released, right? I mean, that's the whole presumption here.
That's the goal, exactly. And like Senator Mesnard said, which I certainly appreciate, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is a good bill and it does good things. Is it perfect? Probably not for everybody. But I think it's really good. And if somebody goes on a spree breaking into cars and they end up going to prison because they broke into 45 cars at Echo Canyon while people are hiking, stealing stuff, they're going to go to prison for a while. When they get out, I want them to not go back to Echo Canyon and break into cars because they have nothing else to do. If they come out with a little bit more education, with some skills, with some incentive and some hope, they're going to go to work. They're going to live with their family and they're going to get a job. I don't want them breaking into cars a second time.
So, Senator Messer, I want to ask you, sir, what are you hearing from the Department of Corrections? And I ask the question because we've heard from critics of the department, for example, that we don't really have the infrastructure for the programs that you envision under this proposal, meaning to say that we're kind of starting from scratch. And if that's the case, there's going to be a ramp up period. There's going to be some costs associated with, getting these programs into place. But I'm also hearing that a part of the problem is resistance from the Department of Corrections. Now, that may not be a fair assumption, but what are you hearing from the department? And what about the idea that right now we may pass this bill, but really we can't implement it?
Yeah, so the department has been part of the conversations. I've had some conversations with them directly, as have others. They're going to obviously, like I said, have a perspective that needs to be part of the broader conversation. You're right that the programs available is a big issue. I would be supportive of using the considerable amounts of one-time resources that we have out there to be the catalyst that creates a sort of a cyclical savings where if we invest some resources up front in a one-time capacity, and these programs work and reduce recidivism, that creates a savings that get reinvested into the programs moving forward, and just sort of spirals in a good way into more and more programs that ultimately leads to more savings. But we have to kind of have that startup where you're sort of in this stuck position. So that will be part of the conversation. But I will say, getting the infrastructure of the bill in place is a big win. Getting the resources in place to make it effective is also needed. But those are all the pieces to this. And again, I don't want folks to say, well, I'm opposed to this because it doesn't have resources. Getting an infrastructure like this in place is a big win. It's something we haven't achieved for years. And then having that budget conversation that includes, as Mr. Norquist has emphasized, an ability to save the taxpayer money, maybe making an upfront investment that gets this going, then saves and a long-term ongoing capacity, those can be part of the budget discussions.
And 40
go
other
ahead, sir.
states,
Yeah.
40 other states, more than 40 states have answered this question. They started out without those programs and now they have them. So with a couple of phone calls, one could talk to other states and find out what's worked and what hasn't. It's going to be easier for Arizona to do this than the other states because Arizona has so many models of this working that they can work off of. And maybe some they don't like and some they do. But the other 40 states figured out how to answer this question on their own.
Grover, what would you consider to be the most successful state? If you were looking around, the rest of the country, which one would you consider really hit, has hit the mark? I guess most of the major marks that we want to hit.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have the answer. I don't. Right on Crime has some sense of. I've just been looking at what other states do and that they've improved, but which one is significantly better than others, I don't have a sense of.
Pat,
On behalf of Right on Crime, I would be remiss if I didn't say that state was Texas, but.
That would be the smart guess. They've been at it longest.
of course, I have to know that Texas is considered to be a pretty conservative state, and also a pretty red state. But you're saying that they have actually implemented these programs and it's working for their state.
Luigi, if we hadn't had Texas, this wouldn't have worked. I've testified in lots of other states, Florida, and you're testifying before these state legislators, and they're doing TikTok or something like that. And then when I said Texas did this 4 years ago, everyone looked up. Texas, you mean I'm not going to be accused of being weak on crime? 4 years ago, you mean it has a track record and nobody lost an election? Then they were all ears. If I'd said, I'm from Massachusetts, where I used to live before moving to the United States, and said, hey, we do this in Massachusetts, I'm not sure a lot of people would have looked up and said, this is going to be interesting. But Texas being the prime mover allowed a lot of other states and legislatures to feel comfortable that this was not easy, but less dangerous than they thought.
Right, and if you were to say, California's done this one, then it would be DOA, I guess, in the state legislature. But Pat, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. First of all, not just Texas, Georgia. The reforms have been so successful in Georgia that they then redid their juvenile system and then have redone probation and parole. So they've had 3 waves of reforms because of the success of each predecessor. I have to say too that this is just the first step. The Arizona Department of Corrections is it's an inherently dysfunctional bureaucracy. They haven't even been able to set up a program to deal with the credits already given to drug offenders. And it's been years and tens of millions of dollars, and they're still doing it by hand. To understand a prison system, haven't been inside, I can say this, and take a DMV office, string barbed wire around it, and give the clerks guns. That is the way. It's a bureaucracy, an inherently inefficient bureaucracy, and it's the only enterprise of man that grows by failing. The more people leave prison and return, the more it grows. So this is the first step. Then we need to reform the Department of Corrections, and we need to have the programs. We don't want to offer inmates this mirage that they can get earned credits, but there are no programs. We have to follow through and give them the programs. But the last thing I'd say, the role of the community, especially the church, a judge once said to me, I can pitch all the people into the community that have a chance of getting back on their feet, but we need catchers there to help them. Dr. King said, to change someone, I must love them, and they must know that I love them. And the church and all the community needs to be welcoming to come alongside them, help them get replanted in society. That's the role that's missing from a lot of these programs. It's not just the government. The community needs to buy in and say, these are human beings worthy of our love and respect And yes, they've fallen short, but haven't we all? It's time to help them get back on their feet and be integrated in the community.
Um,
I
Go
think-
ahead, Kurt. Yes.
I think with that, Luigi, just to follow up on that, some of these programs that we need to implement that we're talking about, what the government hasn't done and DOC hasn't done, which I think they can, is engage private industry in the private community a little more. I've talked to many manufacturers and different industries here in the Phoenix and Arizona area that are like, man, I want to help. I can't get workers. I would love to go to the prisons and train workers. They can build my mattresses. They have a good job. They turn out to be sometimes my most loyal employees, but I don't know how to do it. DOC won't let me in there. I don't have the roadmap in my head, but there's a way to engage private industry that'll, one, save taxpayer dollars in creating these programs and benefit not only that industry, the people that are getting the training, the community afterwards, and the Department of Corrections. So there has to be some partnerships with private industry that are willing to do this, and there's a lot out there.
Luigi,
Grover, and then Pat.
there's a model for failure, and that's the foster care system, where they they take people through the system, dump them out at 16 and a half or so, and into where? Prisons should not be doing the same thing. In Colorado, people who are needed truck drivers, small trucks that you drive around in the city, so you don't have to have an 18-year-old license for crossing state lines. They went to the foster care people and said, could you please let us teach foster care kids that hit 16, 15 and a half, 16, how to drive a car? Because we got a job for $50,000 for them as soon as we can do that. And they had to change the rules because you had to have your parents sign permission to go to driving class, and not everybody had one. So they changed the rules so that a guardian or somebody else could. And all of a sudden you shifted people into kicking them out into the street. Thank you very much. Goodbye. To let me introduce you to somebody who's going to teach you how to drive a truck, small truck safely, and has a job that pays fairly well. There's no reason you couldn't do things like that as people exit prison. We do have a bunch of bad laws in all 50 states that labor unions put in because they were afraid that prisons would compete with them. And so there are a lot of restrictions that really make no sense, and there are not enough people to really have that effect. Hopefully we can get the labor unions to lighten up on some of their objections to those reforms.
Pat, just real quick, and then we'll go into the audience questions here.
Yeah, there's a perfect example of what Kurt and Grover have talked about. There's a great need for people with technical skills, draftsmen, tool and die makers with very specific skills. Of course, they aren't taught in prisons. Corns Galvanizing in Pennsylvania, the owner of it was a friend of Chuck Olson, with whom I worked for many years. And his chief of operations, it was a galvanizing, which is hot, dirty work, but very technical. It needs to be precise. His chief of operations said, we should hire ex-offenders. And Jack said, why the hell should we do that? He said, well, Jesus told us to. So they did. And what they've found is the inmates they have hired are their most loyal employees, like Kurt said. They show up on time. They hold each other accountable. And, the owner, Jack, said, I did this for moral reasons, but it's been the best business decision we made. Over half of their employees are ex-offenders. So there's a model out there. Unfortunately, government-run work programs are Stalinist era, government-run programs. No, we need the private sector training these people. One BOP facility in North Carolina, Butner, North Carolina, agreed with Meineke Muffler to build a facility inside the prison to train the workers. Today you need a lot of computer skills to work on a car. They were guaranteed jobs when they got out and a certificate making them eligible for work in the aftermarket. Unfortunately, that warden retired. The warden that followed him took down the program. He said it didn't fit his vision for prisons. Now that's appalling, but that's the way government makes decisions. We need more creative people saying we're going to involve real companies with real jobs and train the workers for those real jobs.
Thank you, Pat. I want to ask JD, there's a couple questions here that I think are directed to you. One is from Donna. Obviously, the issue of retroactivity is of interest to current prisoners and their families. We might have touched on this one already, but will only drug offenses be eligible for retroactive application of this bill as is currently written? I guess what is your prediction, sir?
Well, I think we can look at, we've been kind of looking at everything in two categories: drug offenses and then sort of everything else that's the non-violent offenses. I'm happy to drill down into either of the two categories. I've heard criticism on the allowing retroactivity for drug dealers, but also is there merit to, there might be some crimes over here that don't really truly involve a victim in the traditional sense, and maybe we would look at restoring some of that part to be retroactive. But it's just tough. We have a set of rules on the books. When these folks were sentenced, this was the expectation on the sentence, and you're always going to have resistance to changing the rules after the fact. It's much easier well, still difficult, but easier in a prospective context. And so I am happy to drill down into that issue, but it's going to be an easier lift to make the more things are prospective, because we're not changing the rules after the fact.
We really are out of time, and it's almost it's pretty much 9 o'clock in the morning already, and I do want to respect everybody's time. So I want to thank Pat, Grover, Kurt, and Senator Messner. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I think we've had a great discussion. To our viewers and to our listeners, I hope you learned something. This is not going to be the last time we're going to have this conversation in the Morning Scoop. There will be a couple others, down the road, and so watch out for those. And of course, to our sponsor, Justice Action Network, I want to thank you again for engaging with us this way. Your sponsorship allows us to hold important public policy discussions such as the one that we have. And with that, I want to thank you all. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and bye for now.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.